Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. For those of you new to the show, my name's Kyle with Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits, and we are dipping our toe into France here on week 11. Now, if I'm being honest, I have been avoiding France because it's a massive topic. If we talk about the history of wine, if we talk about really all of wine in general, we keep going back to France. Now that's perhaps not fair to the Fertile Crescent, because that was the foundation of winemaking, both in kind of Israel and Syria as well as into Greece. But really, when we talk about the modern wine industry in the sense of splitting out individual varietals, putting wine in glass bottles, selling wine as an export product, that all does boil down ultimately to France. We're going to dip our toe very gently into France here. It'd be very easy to kind of go gangbusters here and say, we're going to do Bordeaux, and then next week Burgundy, and the week after we'll get into the Rhone, and then we'll go to Alsace, and we could really do 12 straight weeks. We could have done this entire 11 weeks up to this point just on France. But that would be boring for me, and worse yet, it would be boring for you. So we didn't. We're just gently dipping our toe in the French waters today, and we'll see how it goes over time. So, where are we going to start? Well, we're going to start in the Loire Valley. So for those of you at home, let's open our white wine. This is from Domaine de la Noblaie. Now, this is from the village of Chinon. And for our map nerds, we will get out the map in a moment. But let's talk about this particular part of France first. So the Loire Valley is one of the 4 major regions of France, and it's the one that's a little more complicated to talk about. When we talk about Bordeaux, what are we really talking about? We're talking about red wines that are based in Cabernet and Merlot and maybe Cabernet Franc and a couple other grapes, and whites that are based in Sauvignon Blanc with some Semillon. Cool. And they're very, very expensive for a variety of reasons, which we'll get to when we get to Cahors. When we talk about the Rhone Valley, we have reds that are based in Syrah in the north and have Grenache and Mourvedre blended in with the south with some other things. And for whites, we have Viognier with Marsanne and Roussanne. It's all very easy to categorize. Same thing with Burgundy. Burgundy's even easier. If it's Burgundian and it's red, it's Pinot Noir. If it's Burgundian and it's white, it's Chardonnay. And nobody be, clever Tim pointing out that Saint Brie is Sauvignon Blanc, because no one cares. It is, and it's brilliant, but it's not relevant for tonight. The Loire Valley is more complicated. The Loire Valley is really 3 major subregions, and you'd be forgiven for saying, as you move up the valley of the Loire, your major grape variety is Melon, or by the old name Melon de Bourgogne, and then Chenin Blanc, and then Sauvignon Blanc. And to illustrate that, I think it's map o'clock. So here's our very trusty map of France. Let's get the plants out of the way. Thank you, Susie, for the lovely plants. They're just slightly in the way at the minute. So here's France. So where are we looking? Well, we're not looking down here. There's Bordeaux. We're not looking over here. That's the Rhone. We're not looking up here. That's Burgundy. We're looking at this big, long river valley. And if we're talking about major rivers, the Loire River is to France what the Amazon is to Brazil, or what the St. Lawrence is to Canada. It's by far the largest and the most important of the rivers. But it's split into 3 different sections. There's the Nantes here at the mouth. Now this is where Muscadet comes from. So here the major white grape is Melon, or the old title Melon de Bourgogne. These are light, slightly saline wines, very delicate. As we move up the river, you see the village of Chinon way down here. That's where our wines tonight come from. But you've also got the more famous names of Vouvray. Is Vouvray on this bloody map? No, it isn't, but that's fine. We'll get to a map of the Loire later. But Vouvray is in here. Chinon, Bourgogne, Saumur, they are all in here. And here we are in Chenin Blanc and we are in Cabernet Franc country. And then as we get up over the bend of the river, past Orléans, into the region of Sancerre, almost to the village of Nevers, we get into Sauvignon Blanc country. So this is where Sancerre and Puy-Fumé and very often the most expensive Sauvignon Blancs from France come from. So let's break that down just a little bit further with our second map here. We'll come back to, oh, went right past my dog ear. There we go. This is a much better map. So here we are out on the Atlantic. Here is Muscadet, Sèvres et Maine. Here's Saumur, Saumur-Champigny, Bourgogne, Chinon. Unfortunately, right on the bloody spine of the book, which is not very helpful. Vouvray is up here. And then as we go up and over the bend, here's the Côte de Guiennois, which very often, like, your best value Sauvignon Blancs from France come from Côte de Guiennois, which is absolutely delicious. And then finally, we're into Sancerre and Puy-Fumé, who are on those Kimmeridgian marls or old white seabeds. So this is the same soils that Champagne sits on. The White Cliffs of Dover are based on this. And yes, one of the places that emerges from the Earth's crust is in Sancerre and Puy-Fumé. So that's the Loire Valley as a whole. So let's talk about it a little bit. So we're going to ignore Melon de Bourgogne just because it's not really the most fascinating grape in the world. It can be very interesting, it can be very rich, but it's not always the most interesting thing. Sauvignon Blanc we will cover at a later date because it's Sauvignon Blanc. It's arguably the second most important white grape after Chardonnay. Chenin, and if you were here for the South African event, you know I have a particular fascination with Chenin. I love that we're already into yay maps for comments. Thank you, everyone. That makes me feel better. What's that weird country just north of France? Well, it doesn't matter. You can't grow grapes there, so it's irrelevant. So, Chenin Blanc. If you want to make it in a very, very big commercial style like the co-ops of the 1980s and 1990s in South Africa did, it will give you wine that is kind of like a less interesting cousin of Sauvignon Blanc. It will have nice, bright, celeric, green lime, maybe into grapefruit, fresh green characters, kind of like a Vinho Verde like we talked about with Portugal, kind of like Sauvignon Blanc. It's just refreshing, but it's $9. And South Africa was very good at that for a long time. Now, obviously South Africa's come a long ways with that. We talked about that a few weeks ago. You can also make it honey sweet. The wines of Vouvray, the most famous of the Chenin appellations on earth, they come as dry sparkling wines. They come as sticky sweet dessert wines. They come as dry table wines, very much like this. And Chenin can be done a huge number of ways. I've seen Chenin done from South Africa that was heavily oaked like a California Chardonnay. I've seen it out of Canada where it was so piercingly bright and sharp and shiny that it was just it was almost reminiscent of like a dry Riesling. Chenin is very versatile. I can't really think of another grape except for maybe Riesling or Chardonnay that's as versatile as Chenin Blanc in the sense that almost no matter what you want to do with it, it's happy to do it. It will make a sweet wine, it will make a dry wine, it will make an oaky wine, it will make a sparkling wine. It's happy with all of those things. In this particular example, I get apples right off the nose, which is not very interesting because basically every white wine on earth smells at least a little bit like apples and lemon. Beyond that, though, I get a really nice kind of whetstones mineral character, and then I get something kind of like lanolin or lamb's wool or fresh leather, and that's very typical of French Chenin. Really good Chenins from other parts of the world can pick that up, but I find you have to be in that central part of the Loire, the area around Touraine, whether from Chinon, the Bourgogne, or very famously from the Vouvray. That's really where you need this. Devin, if you're watching, could you remind me the other French Loire region like Vouvray that I really like that I can't remember just off the moment? New drinking game, take a drink every time Kyle says it's map o'clock. Well, we can do that. And yes, you can grow grapes there in a greenhouse. No, that's being mean. Vitis vinifera, most of the varieties, they have a very, very low winter kill temperature. This is something we talked about when we were talking with Brent Rowland of Averill Creek Estates. Just how not that cold it has to get down to for the grapes to die. Even if you pack kind of the rootstocks with, you know, almost like one of those styrofoam rose covers, or if you cover them in mulch or you cover them whatever, if it gets down to -20 for a couple of weeks, your grapevine's dead, and they take years to establish. So no, Britain's not one of those countries that, for at least the Vitis vinifera, is very, very prolific. That said, there are, of course, the North American varieties, the Vitis labrusca hybrids, that can do very, very well. And there are also the German hybrids from the 1930s, like Zagreb and Huxareba and some of the others. They do really, really well because they were literally, let's take Riesling and hybridize it so that it grows at a colder temperature. And they just do very, very well in the UK. And actually, I've had some really interesting kind of German sect-style sparkling wines out of the UK that turned out really, really well, made with some of those German hybrid varieties. No, I wasn't thinking Touraine. I think I was thinking Savinier. Let's see what we can get for comments before we move on to Rosé, and we'll introduce Rosé in general. Uh-oh. I may have broken this. Oh, no, I can fix this probably. Yep, I unbroke it. There we go. Sorry, I don't know what I just did, but it just came with a whole bunch of videos. Okay. Some weird stuff going on in the comments. Not sure what's going on with the guy singing, but let's go straight on to the rosé. Now, while we have some real dispute as to what the major white wine of the Loire Valley is, depending where you are, whether it's Merlot or Chinon or Sauvignon Blanc, for rosés, there's quite a few, but the major grape in the Loire Valley for reds and for rosés tends to be Cabernet Franc. It's grown absolutely in all of the parts of the Loire Valley. Other red grapes that are grown in this part of the world are we're taking Cabernet Franc, are Gamay, the red grape of Beaujolais, and a really unique grape variety called Groyot. We have had a red Groyot in the store. Devin assures me it's one of like 2 or 3 red Groyots made in the world. Groyot is almost exclusively done as a rosé because it has such pale skins that it's incredibly difficult to make a red wine out of. But the Loire Valley, its red wines tend to be pale, thin-skinned, delicate. These are not wines for speculators. Jensen Robinson's Oxford Companion to Wine describes it very much as a Frenchman's wine. These aren't wines for people to buy and stick down in the cellar and age for 10 years and then, you know, sell off and double their money. These are wines for drinking. They're wines that are elegant and complex and food-focused and very pretty, but they're drinking wines, and I find that very charming about them. And that's true right up to their Cabernet Francs. Now in the mouth, I get a little bit of the savory character that you get from some rosés, but I don't get that malolactic fermentation. I don't get the real creaminess. We'll get there. We have a very creamy rosé coming. But I get that pretty Cabernet Franc character. I get the black currants, and I get that kind of tobacco leaf character, and then I get this really pretty mineral thing and maybe a little bit of florals. This is one of those wines that I find, of all of the wines that we're doing tonight, by the way, this is the only one that we carried before tonight. We carried this rosé, we added the white because I trusted the quality here. And actually, one of our best-selling red wines, perhaps our best-selling red wine under 20 bucks, is actually the red Malbec version of this. And then we're doing the higher-end version of it as well. But yeah, these are wineries we work very well with. But yeah, the rosés from the Loire Valley, really, it's kind of what they do best. Gamay makes spectacular rosé. Cabernet Franc makes spectacular rosé. Groyot is really all it does. Whereas if you go to like Bordeaux, I mean, I've seen Bordeaux rosé. I mean, you can make it. There's Cabernet Franc in Bordeaux, but Cabernet Sauvignon rosé, I've seen it. It's kind of terrible usually, but it exists. I can imagine a Cabernet rosé. I wouldn't want to drink one. They're out there. There are certain red grapes that really lend themselves to doing really spectacularly good rosés, and the three major red grapes of the Loire, in Cabernet Franc, Gamay, and Goutte, all do that. So Loire Valley Rosé is perhaps not as well known as, say, Provence, but really, really solid for that. Is Chinon or Chenin the vodka of wine? It can become anything. There's a few grapes like that. I'm not going to jump into just my shameless promo for next week's tasting, but there's one grape in particular, Pinot, that can become almost anything. I think Riesling, I think Chenin Blanc, I think Chardonnay can all become almost anything just by how they're grown and how they're treated in the winery. But Pinot, just by benefit of the fact that it has three really well-known mutants, can do really special things as being kind of the great doppelganger of wines. And yes, the wind sings on the white here. Chante le vent, the wind sings, and Goutte de Rosé. I think that's just taste of rosé or tasting of rosé. Someone whose French is better than mine, correct me. Well, the tablet's broken, so I can't see the new comments, so that's fun. It just will not scroll down to save my life. Okay. Now that we're leaving the Loire Valley, I won't make it map o'clock just yet because Aaron is fixing the tablet, but let's talk a little bit about Cahors, and let's talk about the Haut Pays, or the high country in the French speak. Now, the high country is everything further north on the Garonne, or the Dordogne, or the Gironde. They all kind of end up being the Garonne eventually, in terms of rivers that was not Bordeaux. So now it is map o'clock, now Aaron's done. Let's go back to our map of France. So here's France again, and down here is the city of Bordeaux, and right around it here are the Bordeaux wine regions. So here's the left bank, here's the right bank, and you notice there is quite a bit of wine right around Bordeaux. Some of it's famous, like Bourg and Blaye, and the actual region of the high growth regions of Bordeaux down here, but you notice the river keeps going all the way up to the Côte d'Auvergne. Well, there's also a lot of smaller rivers, including the Lot River up to Cahors and Gaillac, as well as down to Bouzet. Now, Bordeaux was important as a wine region, yes, because it grew exceptional wines in the immediate vicinity of the city, but it was also much more important because it was a major port and it was a major exporter of wine. So if you were allied to the city of Bordeaux, if you were a close friend of the city of Bordeaux, you got to ship your wine out of Bordeaux for free or for very little duty. But where we run into the problem with the Haut Pays, with Cahors, and particularly with Gaillac actually, they ran into the problem where they weren't historically allies or friends with the people of Bordeaux, and so they got taxed and dutied really, really heavily, which for them was absolutely catastrophic in terms of what that did to their wine industry. You know, if the famous wines of Bordeaux are $20 a bottle, say, and yet Gaillac is $35 and is as good, certainly, they deserve more recognition, but they're also $15 more, well, it wasn't going to go very well for them, and that's rather what happened. So Cahors and Gaillac, being the vin de Haut Pays, the wine of the upper country, meaning upriver, they hit the city of Bordeaux, and whereas the Bordelais would be taxed at, say, 5%, their stuff would be taxed at 35%. And as a result, their wines never really established that export market. Now the wines of Gaillac, they are very much like Bordeaux, being based in Cabernet Merlot. And the wines of Cahors are very much like Bordeaux, based in Merlot and Malbec. So these are not wines that are desperately different to Bordeaux. but they weren't treated in the same way historically, and as a result, while we all know Bordeaux, we don't necessarily know these parts of France. And yeah, 100-year-old vines for that. It was so good. Oh, hello, Han. Let's get you some Malbec Rosé here. We're a little ahead of schedule, actually. It's only 20 past 6. We're on the third wine. How odd. I think we need more comments and questions and jokes. That would definitely pull things out and let us have a little more full evening. Now, one thing I want to talk about with this Noblaie Chinon. And by the way, for those confused, Chinon is the name of the village in the Loire where these are from. The white wine is made from Chenin, so it is a Chinon Chenin, which is just one of the ways that wine can be really, really dickish with its pronunciation. My absolute favorite, actually there's two that are really, really rude. In Italy, there is a grape variety called Montepulciano. It's not from Tuscany. It's from a region about 60 miles away called Abruzzi. So the grape variety there is called Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. What does it have to do with Tuscany? Absolutely nothing. Well, in Tuscany, there's a hillside. That hillside is called Montepulciano. What does it have to do with the grape from Abruzzi? Nothing. But you have wine from the region of Montepulciano, which is completely unrelated to wines made from the grape of Montepulciano, and they're really only like 60 miles apart, the two parts of Italy that make them. So when somebody comes in and says, hey, I want a Montepulciano, it's like, which one? The other one that I find particularly annoying is Garnacha versus Garnacha Tintorera. Tintorera sounds like, oh, it's just the red strain of Garnacha. And when we talk about grapes like Pinot Noir, well, Pinot Noir is just, the red strain of Pinot. So, and there is actually a Grenache Gris. So there's actually a pink-skinned version of Grenache. So when you hear the term Garnacha Tintorera, it's like, oh, yeah, Garnacha is Grenache. Tintorera means red skin. So, yeah, it's just, the red version of Grenache. It's not Grenache Gris. No, it's not Grenache at all. It's Alicante Bouchette. Tintorera actually means red-fleshed. So it's not actually Garnacha, it's Alicante Bouchette, which is a grape variety which we call a Teinturier, where it actually has, when you slice even into the darkest of skinned red grapes, they have green flesh and clear juice. There's a tiny percentage of grape varieties, one of which is Alicante Bouchette, that actually has pink juice or red juice, and that's one of them. So it's actually red juiced Garnacha, which is ironic because it's not related to Garnacha. But let's, bit of a tangent. We'll get back to the Gaudou Rosé. So we are in not Cahors itself. This is Côte du Lot, which literally just means the riverbanks of the river Lot, just like Côte du Rhône, the riverbanks of the Rhône River. Now this is 100% Malbec. Now, I am not traditionally a Malbec as a rosé believer. There's grapes that I very much enjoy as a rosé. Alicante Bouchette, for example, Cabernet Franc, Gamay, Goyo, several others. Pinot Noir in particular. But Malbec, I don't know. It's a grape variety that I really enjoy, and we talked a great deal about when we had Mauro and Marcelo on from Finca Trapezio a few weeks ago. But as a rosé, I don't know. But this wine works. Here I get some real malolactic fermentation. The term malolactic fermentation is starting to fall out of favor in the sense that it's not a fermentation in the sense of converting sugars into alcohol. It's now being reclassified as malolactic conversion, but I'm almost 40 and I'm not going to learn to change anytime soon, so I'm going to keep calling it malolactic fermentation. So what that is basically taking the malic acid, or the white wine acid, in the wine. Now this is the acid that when you cut into an apple and leave it on the cutting board and it starts turning brown, that malic acid is what's oxidizing and turning the apple brown. It's a very, very unstable acid in the presence of oxygen. It's what makes kind of Sauvignon Blanc or young Riesling so fresh and so crisp, but it doesn't live very long in most examples. There are ways to do it, but generally speaking, malic acid is the world's most long-lived thing. But lactic acid is. Lactic acid will hold the course. It will stay for a very long time. So when you're making a red wine that you want to live a long time, you pump it into oak barrels. Okay, part of that is you want oak flavor. Sure, oak flavor in a red wine can be a very, very good thing. Also, aging in that red wine cask or that oak cask, it will allow a little bit of oxygen to come into the wine over time, the process we call micro-oxygenation, just little bits of oxygen working their way through the wood. That's a very good thing. But the other thing that happens is there is bacteria that live in the actual wood itself that facilitate this malic acid into lactic acid conversion. So if you say, oh, I don't like big buttery Chardonnays, but I love red wine, well, the big buttery part of the Chardonnay isn't the problem. You drink that all the time with red wines. It's just masked by that red wine flavor. There are red wines that don't undergo malolactic fermentation, but they are quite rare. I would say that even in our store, less than 10% of the reds we sell don't undergo malolactic fermentation. I get some malo on this. It's very rich, it's very heavy, it's very pretty. And this smells drier than the Chinon. It's also quite a bit less expensive. This on our shelves is like $16.95 all day long. But ooh, the nose I sometimes wonder, but once this gets in your mouth, it's like, yes, this is patio wine. This is fun, pleasant, lovely, jammy patio wine. The malolactic fermentation that on the nose smells maybe a touch reductive or a touch weird, now it's mouth coating, it's enriching, it makes the wine feel luxurious, it makes it feel sensuous. It's just a wonderful addition to an otherwise quite tart rosé. Now you've got this mouth-filling richness on top. This is a wine for before dinner. This is wine for a goat cheese salad because that mouth-filling creaminess will work really well with blue cheese or with goat cheese. It's beautiful. I get some of what on this? I'm not repeating myself. Sometimes I don't remember what I said, but no. With this, I get mouth-filling creaminess. I get richness. I get one of those, this is one of those silly things that you kind of develop over a little while. You get this little tiny light way in the back of your head that says, this tastes more expensive than it is. And I think that's what I'm saying sensuous, that's what I mean. It tastes more expensive than it is. This is a wine that I can sell for $16.95, and if I put this in a lineup of $25 rosés, people are like, okay, it's not the best wine on the table, but it belongs in this audience. It belongs in this crowd of $25 rosés. Meanwhile, it's snuck onto the table costing $8 a bottle less. That's kind of what I mean. I find wines that have a certain character, a certain style. They find these really clever little winemaking tricks that cheat the palate into making you think, oh, this must be more expensive than it is. And there's various ways you can do that. Oak can do that depending on how it presents. High alcohol can certainly do that. Alcohol is really interesting on the palate. It makes the wine taste fruitier and richer and more luxurious and older, right up to the point where your palate perceives it as like a cooling menthol thing. And then your palate says, oh no, this is just boozy. This is just alcoholic. This is vodka and grape juice. No, this is terrible. Why are you buying this? And all of a sudden the emperor has no clothes and the whole illusion falls away. So alcohol is really interesting in that way in terms of wine construction. Malo. Malo in the sense of malolactic fermentation or malolactic conversion. Which if you're joining us fairly late is the process by bacteria that live in oak casks. You can also isolate them and use this without oak. So if you want to do a malolactic conversion or fermentation without an oak barrel, you don't want that oak flavor, you can absolutely do that. They've isolated that bacteria. You can just add it as a separate ingredient. But what it's doing is taking the malic acid, the malic acid of the grapes, the green apple acid, and it's converting it into lactic acid, which is more stable in the presence of oxygen and makes the wine feel richer and thicker and kind of more luxurious. That's all that is. And Nicole, I'm right there with you. Something that I, always say when I'm talking to people about wine is, it's spectacularly easy to make a truly great wine. I say confidently as a person who's never made wine. To make a truly great wine for $40 a bottle. To make a truly great wine for $15, $16, $95 is bloody difficult. And to make a wine that not only is good and tasty, but also has a soul, that hasn't been artificially acidified and had sugar added and had alcohol added and had oak chips added and everything else. To make a wine that has heart and integrity and soul and is representative of the region and representative of the grape varieties that are used in it, how do you do that for $15.95? There are those who can. I think this Gaudou Rosé is very much that. And how they do that for that money when like $6 of this is tax? I don't know, but I'm so glad they did. Let's just quickly run through the comments here, just see what's going on. See if Aaron's oh good, Aaron's tablet's broken again, that's fun. Let's have a look here. Grant, I'm really loving your comment. I'm so flustered. How can my favorite grape and wine, Malbec from Chile and Argentina, also produce this delicious rosé? It's what you do with it. It's grown in a very different circumstance. The Côte de Lot is quite a bit wetter than Argentina, which is famously dry. If you were on with Marcelo and Mauro, they were talking about how they actually have to spray irrigate their vineyards. This probably saw some drip irrigation when the vines were getting established, but it would now be dry grown. It sees a completely different climate. It is probably a different clone as well. So when we talk about clones, to grow a grapevine from a seed is almost unheard of now, very much like apples. Nobody, eats an apple and says, oh, well, I really like that apple. Let's plant that apple core and grow an apple tree like that. And that will be the foundation of our orchard. Well, grapes, like apples, aren't true to type. So even if you had the most delicious Cabernet Sauvignon you'd ever had in your life, you went to the winery, you snuck out in the middle of the night, and you took up a whole bunch of cuttings of those vines, and then you grew those grapes, or let's say you stole some grapes, and then you planted those grapes in the ground. The seeds and the vine are not true to type. Taking a Granny Smith apple and burying it out in your backyard, you might get a Granny Smith, you might get anything else in the world, you don't know. Grape seeds are very much the same thing, so you don't tend to plant grape seeds. So what you'll do is you'll take a known rootstock variety, and they tend to go by really anonymous names like BV165, and you'll plant that. And the reason you're planting that is it's known to be resistant to the local pests and soil conditions. If it's really, really dry, you'll plant a particularly drought-resistant rootstock. If you have very, very rocky soil, you'll plant a rootstock that's known to dig particularly deep, particularly quickly, so it can access water quicker. You'll pick a rootstock. You'll let that vine grow up, it'll look very pretty, and then at about 4 years into its life cycle, you'll hack it off about 6 inches above the part where it comes out of the ground, and you'll graft on something else. And that's where you'll graft on your Malbec or your Cabernet Franc or your Chinon or what have you. But there's all different strains of it. Some of these strains are hundreds and hundreds of years old. Some of them are new crossings that have been developed at a university in California, or Australia, or France, or wherever in the last 5 years. They are always training new and experimenting with new clones. So they are still Malbec, but they are a slightly different genetic variation. And when we say clone, we're not saying that they're sitting down in a cloning lab and creating these. What we're saying is they'll bring up this vine and they'll let it produce all these different shoots, and then they'll come back and they'll cut all those shoots off and sell the cuttings to be grafted onto it. It's still genetically the same vine, so it is a clone, but it's not in the sense of genetic manipulation, Mendelian, I guess, but it's not, they're growing it out of a petri dish clone. It's we start with a vine, and we grow these vines specifically not to produce fruit. We grow them to produce new stalks, and then we harvest those stalks to be grafted on to form new vines. So that's what we're talking about with clones. But yes, new different clones for different things. With the Malbec, because it's a major international variety, if you go to buy Malbec, you're starting a new winery, and they'll say, oh, well, Malbec 1 is very, very good in hot conditions, but if it's really, really rainy, it will get downy mildew, but it'll give you beautiful rosés. Malbec 2 is really, really good in high winds, but if it gets really, really hot, this particular variety tends to get sunburnt on the vine. Malbec 3, it's really, really great and really resilient. It'll do a lot of different things, but it yields half a ton less per hectare than anything else. There's always compromises with all of these clones. There's really no perfect clone. There's just the best clone that you can get for your particular site, and it depends what you're doing. You don't really want a version of Cabernet Franc that will never produce a lot of fruit, but will live 120 years unless you're planning on planting that site to make $100 bottle plus wines. If you're making $20 wines, you don't want something that doesn't give you a ton of fruit. There are different clones for different jobs. Ooh, Devin answered this as well. I'll actually go with Savoie. I think Jura is finally starting to get sexy enough that people are starting to really get it. And I love Savoie wine. We have very, very little, but everything I have had from Savoie has been absolutely spot on, especially the sparklings. Looks like the bottle might have been started before we actually got started. Yes, Devin and I did go through these. In some cases, we do have some wines that are new to us. To me, this, and the red were actually brand new for me. I hadn't had them before. I brought them in on the reputation of the other wines that we did carry, and because the agent wanted to work with us on these. So yeah, I brought these in on recommendation and strength of the winery. I hadn't tasted them before. I'm glad everything turned out. But, I did want to know if I was getting into a wine that was absolutely terrible to, anticipate an apology. Hand, what would you like? That one. All right. Entirely reasonable. You just stay away from my Chenin Blanc. That's mine. Again, you just had one. You bloody lush. Fine. Some bloody hands, eh? All right, fine. All right. Let's just run down here and see what else we got for comments before we go on to the last wine here. Craig, you are not allowed to order any sets of the beer tasting. You are going to be gifted a set of the beer tasting for, research. Speaking of, let's take this over to the shameless promotion portion of our evening. We have some future tastings coming up. Now, on the beer side, this coming Wednesday, we are dipping into Pilsners. Now, I think most of you who are part of our Friday night wine tasting crowd will know Craig Coburn. You all love Craig Coburn. He's lovely and beardy and really likes Volvos. And he also knows a great deal about beer and wine, is a wonderful friend of mine. It was suggested, half in jest and half quite insistently, that he be our special guest superfan host for Beer Tasting Pilsners. And so he will be. So we will be exploring 4 Pilsners, all from Alberta breweries. We will be revisiting the Blind Men 5 of Diamonds Pils. We'll be getting into the Establishment Pilsner, which I think at this point might be the only establishment beer we haven't tasted on the channel. We'll be getting into the Banded Peak Mount Crushmore, and we will discuss the new fad of buying up Alberta's craft breweries by the big guys. So Wild Rose, of course, was bought out by Sleeman's, and Banded Peak was bought out by Labatt, so we'll be talking about that briefly. And finally, we'll be telling the really interesting story of Italian Pilsners, how one particular Pilsner by a brewery called Birrificio del Ducato was so good and so revered among fellow brewers that it actually inspired its own separate style. So Pilsner is going to be very, very interesting, hosted by me and Craig Coburn. Now let's talk about wine tasting next week. Now this week, of course, we don't have a guest speaker. Next week we won't either. And then the 2 weeks after that, we will be back to having guest speakers, just because we like to mix it up. Now, our topic for next week is one that I've also been meaning to get to for a while. And this is, a fairly nerdy topic, but also a delicious one, and that is Pinot. Now, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but Pinot is a single grape strain that actually has a lot of different variants. When we talk about Pinot, we often talk about Pinot plus a bit. We talk about Pinot Blanc, we talk about Pinot Gris, we talk about Pinot Noir, we talk about Pinot Meunier. They're all the same. Well, Pinot Meunier, I guess, is a hybrid, but they're all the same grape species. They're all the same grape variety. To the point where if you have a vine of Pinot Noir, you can have bunches of white grapes, which are your Pinot Blancs, bunches of pink grapes, which are your Pinot Gris, bunches of red grapes, which are your Pinot Noir, and on very, very old, like 100-year-old plus plots of Pinot, you can even have individual clusters of grapes that have white, pink, and red berries that actually give you, completely different fruit characteristics. Now, this is a huge expansive topic and also a fairly nerdy one. So I decided what better way to do that than just do wines that are super fun and super likable rather than being super serious. So we don't have, an Alsatian Pinot Gris because those tend to be very serious. We don't have like a Burgundian Pinot Noir. We went with, a couple of Austrians in Mein Klang and Birgit Braunstein. We went with an Italian Pinot Grigio and actually a German Grauburgunder, which we've actually tasted before. This is just meant to be a light-hearted take on a fairly serious and nerdy topic, and it's just going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to the Pinot tasting next Friday. So let's go on to our only red of the evening. Now, this is the first wine that actually bears the appellation Cahors. Now, this is 85 Malbec, 15 Merlot. This is a dark and fairly serious wine. And Cahors is a region in decline, which is such a shame. Cahors is a region that was once quite famous, quite prestigious. They were thought to be inky black and were sold really popularly in Britain. They were really popular actually with a couple of the popes. But now, as popular as Malbec is, nobody knows what Cahors is, and Cahors only won the right to put the word Malbec on the front of the label about 6 years ago, which was just in time for the Malbec craze out of Argentina, but ultimately in the grand scheme of things a little late. Now that's a fun question. Are we doing anything special for Father's Day? Yes, my father will be joining us, and it will be a wonderful, wonderful time. I don't know if it's actually the week of Father's Day, but yes, there is a very particular topic. It's not the Pinot event. It's not the event past that. It's 3 events from now. We will be doing an Australian tasting that features my father for Father's Day, and I'm really looking forward to it. So that's a bit of a spoiler. We won't go into it too much, but yes, my dad will be joining us on the channel for at least the month of Father's Day. We are not shaving Craig. That's not happening. And he might look younger than me, but we're not going to talk about that. Let's talk about the wine. And no, he doesn't. But yes, let's talk about the wine. This tastes kind of like a Bordeaux, and it should. When we talk about Bordeaux reds, we always talk about Cabernet Sauvignon, but this Cabernet Sauvignon is not the most planted grape in Bordeaux. It's actually Cabernet Franc and Merlot. Cabernet Sauvignon comes in third, at least historically. Bordeaux is a really, really famous region that makes some really, really high-end wines, but it's not actually one of the most fun regions in the world to make wine. It's very challenging, it's very wet, it's very cold. The soils can be very challenging. Some of them are very well-draining gravel, some of them are very cold and wet clays. It's a bit of a mixed bag. For Cahors, it tends to be much stonier soil, it tends to be much further up the river, it's much closer to the mountains. And the wines are lifted and spicy. There's a particular white pepper spiciness that I associate with high Malbec Bordeaux's that I can't ever track down out of Argentina, and I rarely track down out of other French Malbecs. But this really has that in spades. It has this white pepper, almost into black pepper, lifted, delicate, fun spice. Almost a bit like steak spice in its way. And then that's backed up with this very gentle fruit right in the mid-mouth. It's not fun and bursting with fruit like a Gamay or like a New World wine. It's not as dried out and serious as maybe a Bordeaux. It's somewhere in the middle. What's the finish on this? 2015? Yeah, that's really pretty. I like this. The forecast is for heckling. I can't wait. Are we putting together a package for Father's Day? I'll be very honest, I haven't given it a moment's thought. This was a heck of a week, so I would like to. I think that would be fun. I haven't given it a moment's thought yet. So give me a minute to think about that, and we'll come up with something for next week. But no, I have not done anything particularly brilliant for Father's Day. I meant to, it's just been a weird week. And yes, Grant, I agree. Like it's a very complex, very long-lasting wine. I think that the 2 rosés are absolutely spot on, perfect, sub $20 patio wines. They're exactly what they should be. The Chenin Blanc is my style of wine. It's got a lot going on, but you really have to dig for it. This Cahors, not only is it delightful, it doesn't make you work for it. I don't care if this is your first glass of wine or your 100,000th glass of wine, you're going to find something here. It's going to show you something. It's going to teach you something. And I really appreciate that, because when we talk about, Bordeaux, we always say, oh, it's Cabernet and Cabernet Franc and Merlot, and then I guess Malbec. But these are really top class French wines from not really that far from Bordeaux as the crow flies. And they're done in such a serious and loving and engaged way. And they don't need, to have the Bordeaux name on. They don't have to say, oh, well, in 1868, this was classified as a 4th tier winery in Bordeaux. And we're so proud of that, even though, we were keeping chickens in the Chateau in the 1920s, because a lot of those really famous wineries, they were great in 1868. What's happened in the intervening 140, 150s, we don't know. Sometimes they're really special. Sometimes they really went to seed for a few centuries. They're a bit of a mixed bag. This wine, this Gaudou winery, I really respect, because I don't think I've had a single wine from them, and now I've had all 3 of their wines in the store. I've never had a wine I don't like from them. You know what? If that makes Grant happy, I'm happy he's happy. How long can you store these in a cellar? It's vintage on this cat, 2015. To be perfectly honest, I wouldn't really cellar any of these. I think all of these are completely fine exactly as they are. Would they change? And this is a question. Would these wines change? Yes. Could they get better? Yes. Were any of them really bottled with the design that you'd keep aging them, that they would be designed to get better with time? Was that the winemaker's vision for any of these? Probably not. And actually, of any of them, if any of them is actually designed to age, it's probably the one you don't expect, which is actually the white. These are designed to be drank as young as possible, and this is already released at 5 years old. This is current release at 5 years. It's ready now. Let me retaste this. Devin could call me out for being wrong, but I wouldn't want this wine any older than this. This is right at peak. It's perfectly settled now. It's like $20, $21, and it tastes like a well-matured Bordeaux for pennies on the dollar. It's great. If you want to buy a case of it, I hope you plan on drinking a case of it in the next year. It's wonderful as it is now. It doesn't need to be aged. This, I think, would actually change quite nicely in bottle over the next 3 to 5, but it's also really nice right now. Aging wine, at least for the North American market, maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 20 bottles, and it might actually be more like 1 in 40 bottles that are actually sold on store shelves, are designed to age, that are designed right from the winemaker, that people are going to take this home and they're going to throw it under their stairs. It has to be substantially less than 2% of wines out there. They're not designed to do that. They're not meant to do that. They're meant to be taken home, cracked open. You've got some ribs coming off the barbecue. You've got, a Celine Dion concert and or football game, depending on your particular preferences, going on, and you shut up, Aaron, and and that's what you're going to do. It's going to be a really, really nice night, and that's what they're designed for. But no, aging wine is not for everything. Okay, I think we will call that the end of the formal tasting, but let's keep it going. Let's talk questions and drinking wine. And it's Friday night, and it's June, and it's absolutely spectacular outside tonight. What's everybody up to? What are we doing tonight? Quiet, Nicole. Celine Dion is great. And no, I'm not backing that up with a dang thing. So I asked this a few weeks ago, and I'll ask it again now. I asked for ideas for upcoming tastings. Now we have our next 3 mapped out. We have the Pinot experience for next week. We have a nebulous project with Mira Wines for the week after that. We have some really neat things lined up, like a white Tempranillo from a white mutant of Tempranillo that, fingers crossed, we're going to be able to get enough of to do on the tasting. We got some really cool things lined up. And then for Australia week, you know, touch wood, we actually have the head winemaker of Newgan Estates out of Australia joining us, along with my father. We'll be able to talk about the history of the store and how kind of Australian wine built this business in the 1980s, when all anybody knew was old world wine, and then kind of Australia and California took off, and we rode that wave to build the store into what it is now. But after that, we're kind of into July. Now, I've had a group out of Spain, a couple of really interesting winemakers, send us a message and say, hey, we'd really love to be part of your July, but what do you want? What would you like to see for July? Devin, you've been recommending Beaujolais since week 1. Oaked versus unoaked Chardonnay. Oh, Craig, you are way ahead of the gun. Yes, Bill Bishop, who joined us way back, before we actually even had the capacity to have special guests join us by video. Bill Bishop joined us for week 2. He is the global sales director and a winemaker as well for Steel Wines, and he joined us to talk about via chat the Catfish is in. We will be doing a Chardonnay tasting once the upcoming Steel order arrives, which is due about the last week of July, the first week of August. So we'll be doing the Shooting Star Chard versus the Steel Cuvée Chard versus a couple other Chardonnays, one of which will definitely be unoaked and possibly one will actually be sparkling. And we will talk to Bill Bishop and possibly also Jed Steele, who is literally the creator of what we now consider California Chardonnay. We will be having those fine gentlemen on for a wine tasting coming up. Have we done a wine tasting on natural wines yet? Several, but sneakily. Spain was entirely natural. Half of the South Africa was natural. I don't know if anything here is tonight, but we've snuck in here and there quite a bit of natural wine over time. I won't say, you know, even half of it, but I'd say a solid third of the things we've done over this time is natural. Actually, Brent Rowland from Averill Creek, all of his stuff is very natural, as was the cider. So no, we've done quite a bit of natural already. But a focus on it, just a discussion of natural wine, that's very interesting. I think we did that a little bit when Eric Mercier co-hosted. We talked about that a little bit, but we need to get Eric back because Eric's an excellent co-host. Greek on the oddball agenda, and New Zealand as well. Let's get back to those. Greece would be fun. There is some truly spectacular wine out of Greece. I'm not sure that the really interesting stuff has hit the market yet. Is there the quality in Greece to do it? Yes. Is the quality being exported yet? No. It's kind of like if we tried to do Austria-Hungary 4 years ago. Could we have done a serviceable job of it? Yes. Could we have done anywhere near the job of what we can do right now? No. New Zealand, on the other hand, the really interesting thing is pricing. There's lots of really good, inexpensive New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, like Oyster Bay, Stoneleigh, Matua. They're all like $15.95, $14.95. They're all cheap as chips. But the interesting stuff, the Kindellies and the Cambridge Roads and some of the others, missing another really important one, the guys who make the Naturalist, they're not cheap. And to do credit to New Zealand, we would actually have to do either a 3-bottle tasting, or we'd have to do it, you know, maybe for $90. And I'm comfortable going 80, 85. I don't know if I want to do one for 90. I certainly don't want to do one for 95 or 100. So New Zealand, we may just have to fish around, maybe wait for something to go on sale. Devin and I do wait around. Like when we see something really exceptional either come out or go on sale, the pick of that, the idea of doing a Mira Wines tasting for 2 weeks from now, for example, came out of nowhere. It was just Mira emailed us and said, hey, we have this crazy or sorry, not Mira, sedimentary. God, been seeing Mira all night, which is wrong. Sedimentary ones email us and say, hey, we have this super amazing like white Tempranillo that's spectacular. You should, you know, pour this for people. And we said, yes, we should. And then we said, well, why don't we just do a sedimentary tasting in general? And it would be brilliant. And that kind of came out of nowhere and happened in the last 24 hours. So sometimes these come about very organically, sometimes they're very planned. Summer Prosecco or sparkling, I'm very down with that. I'd love to have a sparkling week. Maybe August long weekend, just because it's usually one of the hottest weekends of the year, would be perfect for just everything ice cold out on the patio. We even film this out on the patio. I'm sure Aaron would love figuring out filters for all of that. You give a thumbs up. I was expecting a firm thumbs down. But yeah, we could do that. And yes, sedimentary wines, I know, my fault. I kept saying Mira. It's not Mira, it's sedimentary. But I think that's our hour, folks. We will see you Wednesday for beers, and we will see you on Friday for our exploration of Pinot. Thank you all very much for joining us. We will see you in either 5 days for beers, or we will see you in 7 days for wines. In either event, look after yourselves, be well to each other, and take care. I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton, and good night.